18 years ago this week on March 30th, 2003, WrestleMania 19 from Safeco Field in Seattle, a stacked card on paper, and yet it did a laughably bad 550,000 pay-per-view buys, which for a WrestleMania, especially back then, that is a terrible number. That is a terrible drop. We can sit here and ponder exactly why it was. Was it just the fact that the main event was weak? Angle and Lesnar, they just weren't big enough stars at that point? Or, because really they were pushing McMahon and Hogan more than Angle Lesnar as the main. I mean, Angle Lesnar went on last, but they were promoting Hogan McMahon like it was the main event of WrestleMania. Maybe people just didn't want to see those two old guys in the ring, one-on-one. Who knows? Nathan Jones was pulled last minute from a tag team match. He was supposed to team up with The Undertaker against The Big Show and A-Train, I believe. He was pulled from the match at the last minute because he sucked. He sucked so bad. And no matter how much they practiced leading up to the show, there were stories about him practicing Undertaker's home or whatever. They had a ring and they would practice. He was the shits. He was no good. He was hopeless. So they shot an injury angle on the pre-show just to get him out of there. So all he had to do at the very end was do a run-in, and it was probably better off that way. But this was a waste. For The Undertaker and the streak and everything, this was just a complete waste of a year. Triple H beat Booker T to retain the World Heavyweight title. Do we really need to go through this again? If Peacock is removing stuff that's even remotely racist and offensive, they can get rid of this whole friggin' feud for all I care. The way this thing was built up, if Triple H was going to win, if Triple H was going to retain, then there was a different way they should have built this match. Everything they did to build this match up, every insult that Triple H threw in this guy's face, people like you don't belong or become a world champion, you could dance for me, all the fucking racist bullshit. Clearly racial overtones. Don't give me this shit, it wasn't racist. They knew what they were doing. They were playing it up. And I'm not even saying it was right or wrong, but the bottom line is if you're going to do that, at least in the end, the babyface should come out on top. And there was a spot in this match where Booker hit a pretty brutal-looking Harlem Hangover off the top rope to Triple H. That should have been the finish. Not only did Booker T lose, it was the way in which he lost that night. Triple H hit him with one pedigree, and it took about 7 years for him to crawl over and finally cover Booker T. And even after all of that time had gone by, Booker did not kick out. They made this guy look like a fool. And that is why this sucked. Shawn Michaels made his WrestleMania return one-on-one against Chris Jericho. Michaels, who had missed 4.5 years, came back. He had that great street fight with Triple H at SummerSlam. He had the big title win in the Elimination Chamber. Michaels wasn't even sure he was going to come back for any more matches. He didn't have any kind of long-term plan in mind. Jericho had to talk him into doing the Match of Mania. I'm glad he did. It went out there and they had an excellent match. And actually, I think as the story goes, they had such a good match, and Michaels knew it was a good match. They went over their allotted time. And when he came to the back, I don't know who it was, one of the agents maybe, said something about, you guys went long, and Michaels made a comment to the effect of, when you have a match as good as the one that we just had, you can go long. You can afford to go long. Michaels has a history of doing that. He has a history of going long at WrestleMania. He did that with Razor at WrestleMania 10, and Macho Man chewed him out in the back for not respecting the other talent on the show. So apparently history repeated itself. Hulk Hogan beat Vince McMahon in a match that was better than it had any right to be. Roddy Piper made a cameo, hit Hogan in the head with a pipe, but Hogan still managed to pull off the win. Piper made it very clear to the company when he signed to come back. He had done an interview with HBO's Real Sports for a segment that they were doing that was going to be airing in the next few weeks or months, and the company was okay with it. When the segment finally aired in June of that year, they weren't so happy with it. And that led to Piper being fired. That was the same interview where Roddy Piper said, I know I'm not going to live to the age of 65. And he ended up passing away, I think he was 61. when he died. Stone Cold and The Rock. Part 3. With Rock finally getting a win. This after Austin spent the night before and the morning of WrestleMania in the hospital with what he thought might have been a heart attack. He thought he was having a heart attack. It turned out to be an elevated heart rate from downing so much coffee and energy drinks the day before. His heart was just racing a million miles an hour. The fans had no idea that it was going to be Austin's last match. Even if you would have told them, if the match would have been promoted as a retirement match and Austin lost, the people still would not have believed. If you would say to them, here in the year 2021, Stone Cold never came back to wrestle. It's been 18 years. People would have called you a liar, because how many people in wrestling, how many big names in wrestling like Austin retire? Even when they retire at an age that they should retire, let alone if they retire prematurely, don't come back. How many people don't come back? You can count them on one hand. They all come back, unless they're physically incapable of coming back. They all come back. Austin did not come back. Austin stayed true to his word. It's been 18 years, and he has not had a match since. He even had OMR on his vest that night when he walked out. One more round. And, of course, in the main event, Brock Lesnar beat Kurt Angle to win back the WWE Championship. I touched on this a little bit in some of the other history segments in recent weeks. They gave this match away on, or they were going to give this match away on television a few weeks before WrestleMania. About 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks before the show. Kurt Angle had a broken neck. Surprise, surprise. And Kurt was going to need surgery. And they thought, we got to get the belt off Angle. We'll do the match on TV. Brock will win. And in Kurt's place at WrestleMania, we'll put Chris Benoit. And it was going to be Lesnar defending the title against Benoit as the backup plan for WrestleMania 19. And before the SmackDown taping where they were going to do the match, Angle had a conversation with Vince McMahon and basically begged and pleaded, let's just stick to the plan. I can get to Mania, I can give you that main event, and then I can go off and have my surgery. Let's just get to WrestleMania. And he convinced Vince McMahon to allow it. Now, if that were today, they have the whole medical team and everything, that wouldn't happen. But Kurt was able to convince Vince McMahon to let him come to Mania and to let him perform in the WrestleMania main event. But we almost got a very different match. And the other thing people remember is the botched shooting star press where Brock almost broke his neck. Very, very scary. Especially a guy with that much mass coming right down on his head, right down on his face. I mean, that's very different than somebody who weighs 170 pounds coming down on their face. Brock wasn't even going to do the shooting star press. He did it a whole bunch of times. He used to do it in developmental all the time. He would hit it perfectly. It was so smooth. But he wasn't planning on, he hadn't used it on the main roster, and he wasn't planning on using it at WrestleMania either. It was Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis, who went up to Brock and said, hey, big night. You know what you should do? You know what you should use as a finish? How about that shooting star? And Brock was unsure about it, but I think they put a crash pad in the ring. He practiced it. He was hitting it, no problem. And I think Jim Ross also encouraged him, yeah, go ahead and do it. It's a big move on a big stage. That's why he did it. And I remember watching it going, he's too far away. I mean, there's been talk about the ropes were very slick from people's sweat. Brock was very tired. The reason he fucked the move up is because Kurt was too far. I mean, I could tell just when he went to walk up to the top rope. Kurt was 3/4 of the way across the ring. How could he not see that? How come Kurt didn't roll over? He was too far away. And he tried to stretch and make it, but man, that is one of the scariest moments in WrestleMania history. As it was, he got severely concussed, but he's lucky. He only got away with a concussion. And on Raw the next night, Austin was storyline fired, and Bill Goldberg debuted to build to a match on the next pay-per-view against The Rock. 16 years ago, on April 3rd, 2005, WrestleMania went Hollywood. I love the movie trailers with all the wrestlers leading up to the show. Great promotion. Undertaker as Dirty Harry and Triple H and Braveheart and all the other ones they did. Chris Jericho had no match planned for WrestleMania. And it was he, along with writer Brian Gewirtz, who came up with the Money in the Bank ladder match concept. Vince McMahon is the one who tweaked it to where the winner would carry the contract around in a briefcase for an entire year. That came from McMahon himself. And that first briefcase was won by Edge, who successfully cashed in the following year. Edge hated the concept of the match when it was first pitched to him. He didn't even want to be in it. He had to be talked into even being in the match. Got talked into it by Jericho and Kane. And one of the reasons is because he didn't want to be kind of pigeonholed as the ladder match guy. It's like, oh, we don't have anything better for Edge. We'll just put him in another ladder match. So he had to be convinced, and I think it paid off pretty well for him. Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle had one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time, and only practiced one spot in advance of the match. Otherwise, they pretty much called it on the fly. Bobby Heenan said that after the match was over, it was the greatest match he had ever seen. And if the brain says that it was the greatest, then who am I to argue? John Cena won his first world title from JBL, and Batista beat Triple H to win the World Heavyweight title in a main event that was originally going to be Randy Orton against Triple H. Randy Orton as a babyface. But they did Orton dirty after Triple H beat him for the belt the year before in the fall. And the people were far more into Big Dave as a babyface than they were Randy Orton. WrestleMania 22. The following year is, to date, the last one to be held in an arena. They have all been in giant stadiums and domes since then. Big Show won his first WrestleMania match. It took him until 2006 to win his very first WrestleMania match, tagging with Kane against Carlito and Chris Masters. Edge, very upset about not being in the main event against John Cena, wanted to do something big and memorable. And he did, spearing Mick Foley through the ropes, down through a flaming table in their hardcore match. Mickie James won the women's title from Trish Stratus and got yelled at by Vince McMahon when she came through the curtain for using a very sexually explicit hand gesture during their match. Oh, I remember that. I think we all do. According to Bruce Pritchard and Court Bauer, who was writing for the company at that time, months before the show, Pritchard proposed the idea of a Shawn Michaels Eddie Guerrero match at WrestleMania, which Vince McMahon loved. He seemed to be on board with the idea. He loved the idea of, the way it was pitched is that they would draw parallels between their careers. So these two, heartthrobs in their day, coming up, and there were other parallels between their careers, maybe them being on the smaller side and having to work that much harder and scratch and claw their way to the top to become world champion. And Vince McMahon loved the idea of, promoting the match with these parallels between their two careers. It was a match that had never been done before, so you can bill it as, a first time ever match. And he was even McMahon was inquiring and saying, hey, what kind of footage of Eddie outside of his WCW stuff do we have access to? Because they were probably thinking already about, promo packages for a potential match. Sadly, Eddie passed away in November, and the backup plan was Shawn Michaels against Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon almost had a match himself on this show, not with Shawn Michaels, but with Bret Hart. Instead of years later, WrestleMania 26, I think there would have been a better match at WrestleMania 22, although it still wouldn't have been great. You got to remember, this was still years after Bret had the stroke. And once that happened, the Bret Hart of old went bye-bye. As far as in the ring, he was never going to be that guy again. But I find it hard to believe their match at WrestleMania 22 would have been much worse than what they put together at 26. I mean, they worked within the limitations of what they had at 26. Bret couldn't take any shots to the head. He really couldn't take any major bumps. Vince was fucking old. I mean, he's in good shape, but he's old. Even then, he was old. What could he do? But the pitch was made, and it looked like there was at least the possibility that match actually could happen. There was a conference call with the writers and Vince, and they got Brett on the phone. And again, Court Bauer told this story, and it sounded like Brett was at least open to the idea. He was a little on the fence about it, but he was at least open to it. And everybody in the room was like, holy shit, this sounds like it might be a possibility. We might be doing Bret Hart against Vince McMahon at WrestleMania. And then about a week later, Vince told them the match was off. And it had something to do with Bret's end. He couldn't remember exactly what it was. I'm just assuming here, maybe it had to do with his Lloyd's of London insurance. Who knows? Kurt Angle and The Undertaker, they wanted to work together on this show for the World Heavyweight title, and according to Angle, Undertaker was even open to the possibility of Kurt ending the streak. He would have laid down for Kurt Angle and the streak would have ended at WrestleMania 22, but Vince McMahon was adamantly against the idea, and instead they had that fantastic match about a month or so before at No Way Out. Even though that really should have been a match at WrestleMania. I mean, you could have done the match without ending the streak. I don't understand this idea that, he would be against the match because he didn't want to break the streak. Unless Vince had other ideas for why he didn't want to do the match. Maybe he just didn't want to put the belt on The Undertaker. That's the only thing I can think of. Because you could have done that match at WrestleMania and had Undertaker go over. I mean, Kurt ended up dropping the belt anyway in that triple threat match. Rey Mysterio won the championship. So, I mean, why not just do Undertaker and Kurt Angle? They have that classic match at WrestleMania instead. I mean, people remember the No Way Out match, but I feel like you really have to be like a hardcore fan to really remember. Some of these matches at WrestleMania, they just stand out more because it is WrestleMania. And it's a shame that match isn't remembered and talked about more than it is. In the way that some of the other matches that Kurt Angle had are talked about, or some of the other Undertaker, WrestleMania matches are talked about. If they had just waited a month and a half, and did the match of Mania, put the belt on Undertaker. You don't want him to be the long-term champion? Fine, let him drop the belt a month or two later. What's the big deal? And apparently those two felt the same way. The triple threat match for the World Heavyweight title was Kurt Angle defending against Randy Orton and Rey Mysterio. Rey had won the Royal Rumble. They were doing the storyline where he was going to try to win the title for his good friend Eddie Guerrero. Randy Orton had told Rey Mysterio the month before, Eddie's in hell, when they were doing all that crap on TV. They did the best they could with the 9 minutes they had. I think it only went about 8 or 9 minutes. They had their time cut right before they were about to go out to the ring. And I think they were going to go double that, and the match only went less than 10 minutes. So it felt very short because it was very short. For a world title match with 3 guys at WrestleMania, 9 minutes? It's not a long time. And John Cena beat Triple H in the main event. This was the match where CM Punk came to the ring dressed up as a 1930s gangster during John Cena's entrance. It's gangster, not gangsta. So technically, you can say that this was CM Punk's WrestleMania debut. WrestleMania 23 in 2007 had, up until The Rock came back years later, the biggest buy rate in Mania history, thanks to Vince McMahon and Donald Trump putting their hair up in a battle of the billionaires that, depending on different stories out there, either was going to see Trump pick Hulk Hogan as his surrogate and Vince McMahon would choose Big Show so that they can get the visual of Hogan slamming Big Show, which ended up not happening at WrestleMania. Funny enough, it did happen a few weeks after WrestleMania in a match in Memphis. It had nothing to do with WWE. It's kind of a one-time standalone event in Memphis they put together and sold tickets for. And in fact, you can find the video online. Hogan, even with the bad back that he had at that point, slammed Big Show. And Big Show was not in the best physical shape. Big Show was probably at his physical worst in terms of his weight. And Hogan got him up and slammed him. And they could have had that kind of Andre moment recreated at WrestleMania in the same state where Hogan slammed Andre. I'm sure that's why they wanted to do it. It's kind of too bad it didn't work out. I think that would have been a cool moment. But it was not meant to be. It was not meant to be. So that was one idea. Trump picking Rey Mysterio was said to be another idea before Vince McMahon nixed it. He was wondering, why would Trump pick someone so small? It doesn't make any sense. So they went with Umaga and Bobby Lashley, or Bobby Lindsay, as Trump mistakenly called him. More than once, by the way. It wasn't just a one-time thing. He did it again when he appeared on Don Imus's radio show in New York to promote the match. Trump said that his guy is named Lindsay, who is a, quote, black gentleman who is the strongest guy I've ever seen. Vince McMahon got his head shaved that night. And to his credit, Trump took a stunner from Steve Austin after the match. A horrible stunner. It is up there with Linda McMahon as one of the worst of all time. But he did take a stunner. One of Trump's minions objected to him doing it in the back, and he just kind of shooed them away and ignored them after Vince McMahon told him that, the crowd's going to go nuts for it. As soon as he heard the crowd's going to go nuts for it, he was shooing his people away saying, get out of here. I'll do it, no problem. And Austin gave him the stunner. Batista and The Undertaker were furious over their world title match being relegated to the middle of the show. So they went out and they stole it. They stole the show. They had a great match. It should have been the main event that night. Instead, it was John Cena defending the WWE title against Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels got that spot when Triple H tore his other quad, in January. They were preparing for a Triple H John Cena rematch. I don't know what Shawn Michaels would have done. Maybe they would have worked him in there as a triple threat. I don't know, but Triple H was hurt. Shawn Michaels got his spot. And, Michaels, he was said to be steaming mad with Cena when the match was over. He thought that John Cena did a very poor job of selling the leg. Michaels was working over Cena's leg, his knee, for a good part of, I'd say, the first half of the match, as I recall. And he just didn't think he did a good enough job of selling it later in the match. He took great issue with that. He even blew off Cena when the match was... You could tell something was wrong because when the match was over and they were showing replays, the replays ended and Cena had to leave the ring to go get Michaels to stop him from leaving. Because the reason he did that is because the plan was, in the ring, Michaels and Cena would shake hands. It would almost be like an endorsement, like, okay, you got one over on me kind of thing. Michaels didn't shake his hand. Michaels went to go leave. And Cena, remembered what they were supposed to do. He went out to go get Michaels and kind of turned him around. And you could just tell, just look at Shawn Michaels' face. I mean, he looked... That was more than him just kind of selling that he was upset about losing in storyline. So I can absolutely believe that he was not happy, and he was supposed to shake hands with Cena. He never did. He just walked off. I thought their 55-minute Raw match from the UK a few weeks later was, not that this was a bad match, but I thought that was a much better match. 13 years ago this week, WrestleMania 24 from Orlando. TNA planned to attack the show. Maybe attack is a bit of a strong word. But they were going to fly an airplane over the Citrus Bowl with a giant banner promoting Impact Wrestling Thursday nights on Spike TV. Somebody tipped off WWE about it. They were able to get the plan nixed. But TNA did park a truck outside the stadium with a screen on the side of it that was showing TNA matches outside the stadium. WWE tried to get Oscar De La Hoya for a tag team match pitting him and Rey Mysterio against Floyd Mayweather and Shane McMahon, but De La Hoya opted against doing it. Mysterio then tore his bicep, and we were left with Big Show coming back. He was in probably the best shape of it, at least the best shape he had been in since his WCW days. He had dropped a ton of weight. And it was Big Show one-on-one against Floyd Mayweather. The angle that they shot at No Way Out with these two to set up the match was just masterfully done. A masterclass in how to shoot an angle like this to get people invested in wanting to see this match. Shawn Michaels beat Ric Flair in what was to have been Flair's retirement match. I can never say this with a straight face. what was supposed to be Flair's retirement match. Well, I guess it was. It was his WWE retirement match. Although if it were up to Flair, he would have already been back. But Vince McMahon wants him to stay true to his word. So he never did wrestle again in a WWE ring, although Flair, he went on to wrestle several more times. Undertaker beat Edge to win the World Heavyweight title, which featured the longest sprint down to the ring by Charles Robinson that I have ever seen. I love that video I saw once of somebody putting the Ultimate Warrior's music to his big run down to the ring. I think one ref got bumped, and so here he comes. It's the longest friggin' aisleway. Funny enough, longest aisleway until the next time they were in Orlando, which was WrestleMania 33. Guess it was the same building, was it not? I think it was. They might have renovated it, but I think it was probably the same stadium. Very long. It was something like 80 yards down to the ring at WrestleMania 33, so it was probably every bit of that here. But after the Undertaker's win, there was a pyro accident in the upper deck that led to 45 fans suffering at least minor injuries. 3 of them had to go to the hospital to be treated for their injuries. Could have turned out a lot worse. Fast forward to April 3rd, 2011, WrestleMania 27. WWE wanted Brock Lesnar to be on that WrestleMania card for a match with The Undertaker. It would have been Streak versus UFC champion. Lesnar at that time was the UFC heavyweight champion, but then he lost the title to Cain Velasquez. That happened on the same night, UFC 121, that The Undertaker was in the crowd at the UFC show that night, being interviewed by Ariel Helwani when Lesnar walked right by him, and Undertaker asked him, "You want to do it?" He was there for one reason. He was there to shoot an angle for a match at WrestleMania with Brock Lesnar, which UFC President Dana White had no idea they were there to do. And I think Undertaker kind of felt bad about it after the fact, because I think he had gotten him the tickets, and Dana White knew nothing of this plan that Vince McMahon had hatched to try to get Brock in for... And Brock may have known too, but nobody clued in Dana White. Dana White said, no, I'm not letting him out of his contract, and I'm not... Or at least I'm not letting him while he's under contract to the UFC, even though he lost the title. No. The answer is no. He would not let Brock Lesnar do WrestleMania. And so Vince McMahon then, and Dana White has told this story before, Vince McMahon then pivoted when he realized, okay, we're not going to get Brock for WrestleMania. So the backup plan that Vince McMahon came up with was for a real fight between himself and Dana White. And he told Dana White we could do it at WrestleMania, or I could come to the UFC, and we can do it in the Octagon. And Dana White has said, if he had agreed to this and lost, if he had lost to Vince McMahon, he said he would never be able to show his face again. Sting was considered, briefly, but he was considered for a match with The Undertaker that year, but he ultimately decided against it. He ended up signing another one of these little one-year rollover contracts with TNA, which he ended up doing several times. And instead, Undertaker wrestled Triple H. Edge retained his world title in the opener against Alberto Del Dipshit after he had won the Royal Rumble that year. And that would be Edge's last WrestleMania match for 9 years. Jerry Lawler finally got his elusive WrestleMania match, but it came unfortunately against Michael Cole in a match that Cole ultimately won when the decision was overturned. So in the record books, it is a Michael Cole victory over Jerry Lawler. The match was a complete abomination. Cole got so much offense. I mean, he got a comically absurd amount of offense in this match, and it went just way too fucking long. If it was something short and Lawler had, maybe taken a few shots, but then basically kicked this guy's ass, they had Austin in the ring as the referee, maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. But this was just a complete, embarrassment. And The Miz retained the WWE title over John Cena in the main event had no business being the main event. This match should not have been a WrestleMania main event. Miz suffered a concussion. His head bounced off the concrete at one point. The Rock got involved. He had returned to the company after an 8-year layoff, for 7 years, whatever it was. He was the host of WrestleMania. I think this was the first time they did this whole host of WrestleMania shit. He was the host of WrestleMania. He got involved and basically gave Miz the assist. Miz ended up retaining the championship. Miz was really more just of a backdrop. It was about Rock and Cena. This was the beginning of the Rock Cena program. Miz was just a warm body in the mix. It almost didn't even matter who the champion was. And it was the next night on Raw that Rock and Cena shook hands and agreed to have a match 1 year later at WrestleMania 28. It was the earliest that a WrestleMania main event has ever been set up.